Welcome to Daily Armor. Today we're going to be in the book of Numbers, chapter number 20, look in verse 7 and 8. Numbers, chapter 20, verses 7 and 8. And they say, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so that thou shalt give the congregation and their beast drink." So here we're seeing when Moses needs to go to the rock. The rock has been giving them water. But here in the land that they're at, this is where Miriam has just passed away. If you'll look back up here, in verse number 1, it says, "Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the desert of Zin in the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there." So Miriam is Moses and Aaron's sister, and she has died here in this desert land. And it says the problem is here in verse number 2, "And there was no water for the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron." So here again, and I was reading the commentary that is in my Bible, and it was saying this is in the 40th year. So for 40 years, they have been gone from Egypt. For 40 years, they've been out here in the wilderness, and yet we still see the same thing happening over and over and over again. And it says here, "And there was no water for the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron." So when there's trouble comes, this trouble comes like it has time and time and time again over the last 40 years. They are still going to Moses. They are still going to Aaron, and in anger, coming against them, demanding things of them, and having the same complaint over and over and over again. Let's look again what they continue on in verse number 3. It says, "And the people chode with Moses and spake, saying, Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord? And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt, to bring us into this evil place? It is no place of seed, or of figs, or of vines, or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink." Oh, this is the same thing that Moses has been hearing for 40 years. Why have you taken us from Egypt? Why did you lead us away from Egypt? We were fine in Egypt. Things were fine in Egypt. In Egypt, they were in bondage. In Egypt, they were slaves. When a slave is no longer useful, a slave is cast away like a piece of property, like a piece of trash. And they're not remembering that. They're not thinking about that. It's looking enticing that they should have stayed in Egypt. And that's what sometimes the world has a tendency to do, is why in the world would you want to be, serving the Lord when you could have all of this? You could have all of this stuff, all of these things. When in reality it's bondage. It's bondage. This past spring, we had a spring revival. And we had a fall revival. But in the spring revival, there was one particular message that was preached. And it was the whole gist of the message was, why would you want to go back? Why would you want to go back? If you think about the way that we live now, why would we want to go back? Like, one of the things that I love in my kitchen, when we moved here, my kitchen didn't have this appliance. And we quickly realized that it was way more valuable than we had ever thought. But it was a microwave. I did not have a microwave. My microwave in North Carolina was built in over top of my stove. I didn't have one that sat on the counter. So when we moved here, it didn't take us very long after we lived in the camper for a while. But after we did purchase a home and we got into our home, it didn't have a built-in microwave. And so I was like, well, we don't need a microwave. Well, after a lot of when you get your leftovers out and you got to put everything back in pots, you got to put everything or put stuff in a pan and put it in the oven and wait and wait and wait for it to heat up. We quickly realized that, hey, this was an appliance that we thought we could live without, but it's very, very handy to have around. You could just make a plate put it on a paper plate, pop it in the microwave, and in less than a minute, a lot of times 30 seconds, you're ready to eat. And then for me, it was all this dirtying up all these pots again and all these pans again and all this. And then I had hungry children and, wanting to, Mom, I need something for lunch. Well, there was leftovers from last night, and waiting on all of that to get there. And so we've quickly found out that we didn't want to go back to the way it was before we had a microwave. And so we hunted up a good deal and found a microwave that mounted over top of my stove, like what I had back in North Carolina. And we were, one of those simple little luxury pleasures that I don't want to go back to not having a microwave. I enjoy having to be able to pop in. I don't even realize how often that I use a microwave. But that's just one. That's just a simple little something. And can we live without a microwave? Sure we can. Do we want to go back to living without a microwave? I don't. There may be some other things that you don't want to go back to. I know that the Lord spoke to me through that message, and there was some things that I was actually wanting to make some changes. And the Lord used that message to help me and to say, why would you want to go back to that? Why would you want to go back? And I was like, Lord, I don't want to go back. And he was letting me know that you're not going back to that. You're not going back to that. And so there's some things in life that we shouldn't want to go back to. It took me a long time to be here in Florida for me to stop wanting to go back to North Carolina. I love North Carolina. I feel like that is my home. That's a very important place, and it will always be very important to me. But I am so content of where the Lord has me. Here in Florida, I'm so content. I wasn't content for it took me a long time. But I was thinking about this. I'm like, man, after 40 years, you still want to go back to Egypt? I think if the Lord leaves me here in Florida for 40 years, I think I was thinking, man, would I still have been wanting to go back to North Carolina? And then I realized that I don't even know when it happened. We've been here over 13. I would say it happened somewhere around, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, where I was finally over wanting to go back to North Carolina. And North Carolina was not bondage for me. It was wonderful blessings, wonderful memories. I love North Carolina. I will always be a Carolina girl, and would love to, go way more often than I get to go visit. Saying all that, I'm at home here in Florida. I am home and I'm content because this is where God wants me to be. I'm no longer bucking and resenting that God made me leave my precious North Carolina to go anywhere else, whether it was Florida or anywhere else. I was very much, I was very upset to come here. And it took a lot longer than it should have. And I have so many regrets about that. And I've had to apologize to the Lord about that numerous times. Lord, I don't want to go back, and then finally the Lord helped me, and I don't want to go back. I mean, I love being here. And if the Lord chooses to do something else with us, I want to, I don't want to buck that. When changes are coming, when God has a different way of doing something or a different plan, I want to follow those instructions. And that's what this is talking about here is we have a problem, we have an issue, and the rock has given them water before, and Moses and Aaron, they go to the Lord. You see this here in verse number 6. It says, and Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. So they left the people so they could go talk to the Lord about it. And we have to do that. We have to get away from some things and spend that quality, that quantity time, that quality time with the Lord. We have to give it the time to speak to Him about it. And they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. The Lord showed up. They went to the Lord, and the Lord showed up, and He gave them some instructions. That's what they needed. Lord, what do we do? What do we do about this? And He gave them some instructions. And the Lord said, and this is our verses, verse 7 and verse 8. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, this is His instructions: Take the rod and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. So he tells them to take the rod. And when I think about that rod, I think about that authority. And it wasn't really Moses' authority, it was God's authority. Because really, could Moses and Aaron fix the problem of the people? They haven't been fixing the problem of the people for 40 years. God has been using this. They were simply the spokespersons for the Lord. And God was the one who was, whenever they come to the water and it was bitter, and God told them how, and He made the water, He made the water clean and ready to drink. And then when they needed, victory over this difficulty and that difficulty, and God was the one who came through battle after battle, even just fleeing the Egyptians. When they get to the Red Sea, they are hemmed in. They have the mountain, and they have the water, and they have the enemy, and they're surrounded. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? And God speaks to Moses and tells Moses what to do. And he parts the water, and they go across on dry land. Now, is this something in Moses' ability? No, this is not Moses' authority. This is the rod of the Lord. This is God's authority. This represents God's authority. And when I was thinking about that, translating these instructions to my life, what do I have? I have His word. This is the authority. Sometimes it's got things for my correction. It's got things for my comfort. It's got provisions. It's got things that I need. It's got things that you need. This is the power is not within me, not in my abilities. He is in me, but it's not me. It's Him. It's Him. So I was thinking about, when He told Moses, take the rod, and I'm thinking, okay, Teresa Gale, take the Bible, take His word. And then it says, the next instruction was, gather thou the assembly together. And I'm like, all right, gather yourself together, and gather with those on the daily Armour, gather with those that you teach in Sunday school, gather with your husband, and let's gather together, gather with your children and your grandchildren. What are we going to do when we gather together? And we'll see there here, the next instruction was speak to the rock. Speak to the rock. Look at His instructions. Verse number 8, take the rod, gather thou the assembly, and speak ye unto the rock. Speak ye unto the rock. We need to go to the rock. We need to pray. We need to ask and seek and knock. Moses also, if you want to turn there, if you don't want to, that's fine. But in the book of Deuteronomy, if you'll turn to chapter 32 in the book of Deuteronomy, I'll get you to look at a verse here. The book of Deuteronomy and chapter number 32. And in verse number 4, it says, He is the rock. He is the rock. And if you'll notice in your scriptures, that rock there is capitalized. He is the rock. His work is perfect, for all His ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity. Just and right is He. Go to the rock. I was working on this scripture yesterday. I was in the book of Numbers chapter 20, and I was in the book of Deuteronomy, the whole chapter of chapter 32. It's the song of Moses. This is what he shared with the people right before that he was going to go up to the mountain to die. God had instructed him, had told him this is what was fixing to take place. He knew he wanted to share some things with the people, the last words to the people before that he went to the mountain to die. And he shared this song. And I was thinking as he shared this with the people, was he thinking about this particular day that he had that's shared with us here in the book of Numbers chapter 20? Was he thinking about that day and about what went wrong? And as we look at the instructions that were given, take the rod, gather the people, and speak to the rock. Now, if you'll look down in go back to Numbers chapter 20. Back to Numbers chapter 20. If you'll look at what Moses did, you'll find that in verses 9 through 11. Verses 9 through 11, you'll see what he actually did. And it says, and Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. So he did the first instruction correctly. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And then, so him and Aaron gathered the people together. So he took the rod and he gathered the people. And then let's see if he spoke to the rock. And it says that, and speak, he told him to speak. And in verse number 10, it says, and he said unto them, he's not speaking to the rock, he's speaking to the congregation. The Lord told him to take, gather, and speak to the rock. Take the rod, gather the people, speak to the rock. I wonder what would be different. I wonder what would be different had Moses did exactly what God had instructed him to do. And then I think so many times that, Lord, do I get some of it right, but then I mess up the most important part? You know, I'm understanding with Moses. He was aggravated with the people. He had been hearing for 40 years, why in the world did you take us away from Egypt? The same thing over and over and over again. I'm sure that, you know, a couple of years after I was here and I was still crying over, I want to go home, Lord. I want to go back, Lord. And he was probably aggravated with me, thinking, I've got you here for a reason. I've got you here for a purpose. This is where your supplies are going to be. This is where the direction and everything's going to be. This is where I've sent you, and this is where you need to be, and this is what you need to do. And here we've got Moses, and he's obviously upset with the people. He's obviously angry and sick of it. He's tired of it. He's so tired of it. But he's taking it out on them. And instead of doing what God had told Moses to do, was to speak to the rock. And instead, he speaks to the people. And it says here, and he said unto them, hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? Not only is he angry with the people, and his tone would be very angry with the people, calling them a name, calling them you rebels, you know, and must we fetch you water out of this rock? And then not realizing that his tone was also directed at the rock of our salvation, the rock that was going to provide for them, the rock that the Lord told him to speak to. He didn't tell him to speak to the people. God probably knew Moses was not in the right frame of mind to speak to the people. And had he really listened to God's instructions and just simply spoke to the rock, I really wonder if God would have I think God would have even given him the words of what to say to the rock. Like when he got to that point, he's got his rod, all the people are gathered together, and then it's time to speak to the rock. If Moses would have went to the Lord and said, okay, Lord, I'm here and I'm going to speak to the rock, but Lord, what do I even say? And I remember whenever I was under conviction, and it was that Monday night I was under conviction, and I knew I was lost. I mean, I had said, I am on my way to hell. I'm lost. I am not going to heaven. I believe in my head, but I don't have him in my heart. I know a lot about him, but I don't know him. I know a whole lot about him. I've read the word. I knew a whole lot of facts, but I needed faith to know him personally. And I'm thinking, I didn't know what to say. And I remember Preacher Lockie saying, he'll even tell you what to say. And I'm wondering, here at this instance, would God have then instructed him exactly what to say? And the people would have been witnessing that. Maybe it would have finally got them to take their eyes off of Moses for their problems and put it on the rock, who has the answer to their problems. But he didn't do it that way. He was speaking to the people, and he was angry with the people, and he said, "Ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock?" Do you realize what he's saying? He's like, do I have to fix it again? Do I have to go to this rock and fix it again? He wasn't doing it at any time. It wasn't Moses. It was always God. But Moses is just caught up in the moment. Moses is caught up in, he's been hearing this for 40 years. Again, why couldn't we have just left us in Egypt? Why did you have to mess with us? We were fine. Pharaoh wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad that we worked and that we had taskmasters out there, and that we had whips and sickness and we had to, it was hard labor. That wasn't so bad, really. Sin always looks better than it actually is. It's bondage. It's bondage. The youth choir, we sing a song, and it's "I Am Free." And when I was thinking about this part of the devotion for today, I was just thinking about once a slave to sin and things that held me prisoner. I was bound and doomed to die in misery. So if they'd have been left in Egypt, once they got of a certain age, once they got to a certain ability, where they weren't very productive, they couldn't, lay the brick, gather the mortar, gather the supplies up. When they weren't able to do that, they would have been discarded. The enemy always makes it look different than it is. Sin always looks more enticing than it actually is. It doesn't mention the chains that come with it. It doesn't mention the bondage. It doesn't mention the addictions that you think you have under control that are always out of control. The things that we're not able to control. And so bondage is just misery. And God freed us from that. Jesus broke those chains. He broke those chains of bondage and freed us from that. And we should never want to go back. We should never want to go back. And here we have Moses, and he's upset. And instead of speaking to the rod, he speaks to the people. And he speaks out of anger. And he speaks out of anger about the rock. And maybe not even realizing in the moment until after it already took place that he was being disrespectful to the Lord. And here we see what happened. Verse number 11, and Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. Jesus only had to be smote. He only had to die on the cross one time. One time. Previously, God had instructed him to strike the rock. Previously. This time he told him to speak to the rock. Not strike the rock, but speak to the rock. Jesus died on the cross one time, and that was all that was needed. Now we have the authority and the ability, and that we are allowed, if you're saved, you have access to the rock of Jesus Christ. He is the rock. He is the rock of my salvation. If you're saved, he's the rock of your salvation. He's our firm foundation. I just love him. I just absolutely love him. Moses lifted up his hand, verse number 11, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beast also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. See, God had a plan. Something was supposed to take place. He was having the people watch. He wanted Moses to speak to the rock. while the people were watching, this was going to change them. Maybe they were never, ever, ever going to want to ask to go back to Egypt. Maybe they were never, ever, ever going to have an issue of thinking that Moses was the one that was providing for them. Maybe they were finally going to get it, that God is our source and our supply. Maybe they were going to get it and they just needed to see it. Maybe God was going to let them see it for themselves. See it for themselves, that it's not about Moses, it's not about Aaron, but it's about God, and that God is the rock. God is our firm foundation. He's the source and he's the supply. And here he's having to reprimand Moses for his actions because he didn't follow those details. Make a huge difference. And I'm probably the world's worst at messing up in the details, and I'll miss it, and I didn't get all, maybe I did like Moses. Maybe I'm taking, the Bible or the rod, and maybe I'm gathering up, but maybe I'm speaking to the wrong thing. And what I need to do is speak to the rock. I want to invite you to speak to the rock with me. I'm speaking to the Lord about some things, and even some things that maybe you need to speak to the Lord about. You need to ask, seek, and knock, and we're going to the rock of our salvation. Let me finish here in verse number 12. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. This is the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. So the Lord provided the water, even though his instructions weren't followed exactly the way that he asked them. And it just means that when we don't follow those details, that we're missing out on what could have been. It could have been so different. We don't know. We won't know. But also the lesson here is, and the challenge that I have for you today is to take your Bible, gather yourself, if maybe you have prayer partners, maybe you have a praying spouse and y'all can pray together, maybe that you have siblings that you pray with, maybe that you have co-workers that you pray with. Gather together, not to speaking to each other, not giving each other, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, not giving advice today, not giving counsel, not giving instructions, not giving a reprimand. You might be the Moses to somebody, and they're looking to you, and you need to say, no, don't look to me. I don't have the answers. Don't give them your opinion. Don't give them your opinion today. You have no answers, but instruct them like God instructed Moses, and speak to the rock of my salvation, and that's Jesus Christ. Jesus is the rock. And that would be my counsel today. If I was to give any counsel, is just simply speak to the rock. Join me in prayer, thanking the Lord for what he has done, what he will do, what's to come, and asking God, Lord, I need your direction. I need your provision. I need your comfort. I need your counsel. I need everything that I need. Anything that's in my life that's dry, and there seems to be no water coming for it. There seems to be no nourishment in the situation. There seems to be nothing but just getting more brittle and more brittle. I don't know what kind of dry condition and situation that you might be in. I know I have some situations in my life that are just dry, and I'm thirsty. And the Lord's saying, go to the rock. Speak to the rock. Now be careful how you speak to the rock, but speak to the rock. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again soon.